Hey guys. So I recorded this great conversation with Chris White from Planitar. And during the recording, I experienced some issues with my microphone. Chris could hear me okay, I think, but you guys aren't going to be able to hear me okay. So what I'm going to do is attempt to do a Bruce Lee style voiceover um, so I can repeat the questions with clearer audio, and then you'll hear Chris's answers. So sorry about this little technical difficulty, but let's get on with the show. Hey, everybody. Tom Sparks with Sparks Media Group. Today we have Chris White. He's with Planitar, and he's going to help me go over some stuff with the iGuide system, the Planix Pro in particular, for scanning large spaces, non-residential type stuff. Welcome, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about what you do
Sure.
or what you don't do, because you do it all?
That's fair. That's very fair. So I work for Planitar, which is a company that makes iGuide, which some of you may have heard of. I work in marketing, but for years and years, I was a real estate photographer and a home inspector and an energy evaluator. And I, have a lot of experience at going to properties, big, small, medium-sized, capturing data at them. So I'm very familiar with our technology, how it works, and how to use it in big, monstrous spaces. I don't mean to brag, but I've done hospitals. I've scanned grocery stores. I've scanned warehouses. I've scanned all sorts of weird stuff that's gigantic. And I've also had the privilege of working with people who've scanned spaces that I obviously would never scan, like museums and coliseums and airports and other giant spaces.
Wow, nice. Well, I have a ton of questions probably. So I guess we'll start off with the easiest one. What's the largest space that you've scanned, and what's the largest space to date that you think that Planitar has processed?
Right. That's a great question. So they're going to be two different, radically different answers. So the biggest space that I've done, I think, was probably I'm gonna say there's a few different ones in the 2 to 300,000 square foot range. So I actually scanned the National Association of Realtors show floor in 2016 during the show. So that's in Orlando at like the convention center or something. I don't know exactly what it's called, but there's a big, obviously convention center thing there. And while the show was going, I just started scanning the show floor, and it's huge, hundreds of thousands of square feet. And I did it and with people in it, walking around. And it was challenging, obviously. But the capture process was fun. It was mostly an exercise in sort of just like getting the technology in front of people's faces so they'd ask me questions about it. So anyway, that answers your first question. It's probably 200,000-300,000 square feet. I'm guessing that that show floor was probably 280, I think, something like that. That's a guess. But the biggest space that has ever been done by Planitar, I can't tell you exactly what it was because it's for security reasons. It's private. Yeah, confidential. Yes, exactly. But it's like, oh my gosh, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet. And it actually involves multiple separate structures that were all done under one project. So one of the cool things, without being too salesy about iGuide, is that you can scan multiple things and then mush them together later, even from different cameras as well. So that's what was done. A whole bunch of different spaces were all as part of one big project, were all put together and then sent all in one go. But yeah, it was over 500,000 square feet easy.
Wow.
What exactly it is, I can't tell you, but definitely.
No worries at all. So you mentioned that you can scan with multiple cameras and mush them all together, which is huge because some of your competitors you can't do that with, and that gets a little frustrating. Is there a limit on how many cameras you can scan? So if you had a 200,000 square foot space and you had 10 people loose in it, is that okay, or is there?
It's perfectly okay. There's no limit. I think there probably are some limits without getting too technical, maybe if people are too close together, but they're like, what, like Wi-Fi interference might be a limit, I guess. Every camera has its own, unique hotspot that you connect to, with your smart device. So they're all independent. The data itself, it all has to be combined later, obviously. But yeah, there's no obvious limit to the number of cameras other than cost. You'd have to get all those cameras. So that's a thing. There is a funny thing that happens when you have a bunch of cameras. That isn't a limit. It's mostly amusing. So when we do trade shows, we often have multiple cameras set up. And if you turn all the cameras on at once, it's hard to tell which camera you're actually looking at if you haven't renamed it. So you might connect to your friend's camera over here.
Right.
It's solved by just turning them on one by one. But yeah, there's no limit. It's actually been almost essential for bigger projects. So obviously this if you've done spaces that required like sort of multiple visits.
Yeah.
But you can greatly shorten the amount of time on site if you have more than one camera. So there's some properties that offer you a window that necessitates multiple cameras. There's no way, a hospital, for example, can let you scan for a week, without multiple cameras, it's just not going to happen. It's not viable.
Yeah. So that's been a kind of a pain point with some of the competitors for me, is that it's limited to one person on one device scanning at one time to get a link out of it. And to your point, the time on site, sometimes you only have those small windows. You don't have the luxury of saying, hey, I need to shut down for a week to scan this space. They're like, no, you got like 2 hours and you got to hurry up because I'm on my lunch break.
Exactly. There's so there, because of the way the data is captured with iGuide cameras, it's very friendly to capturing large spaces in sort of a sporadic way. That's not ideal, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. And with multiple cameras. So the data is very flexible. It can be combined after the fact within one camera's project or within multiple projects. So that's just a weird way of saying, sometimes you go to a giant property and you scan like wing A, and then for some weird reason you have to go to somewhere else because the guy with the keys is like, oh, this area is available now, and you're like, all right, cool, let's do the mechanical room, and you go do another thing, and then you come back and you start doing that other project again, but then you're like, oh, I'm going to make it a separate thing to keep my story straight, because that happens with big spaces, is that sometimes when you're scanning them, really the technology isn't necessarily the barrier. It's like your brain, because you need to figure out like where you've been and where you haven't been, and everything starts to look very samey, especially in things like warehouses and hospitals and whatever. So the nice thing about that is if you capture multiple sort of sections of a space with iGuide, you can just drag and drop them together later in Stitch, if you're doing an iGuide, and you can sort of move things around. And I'll give you a funny example of that, actually. So sometimes time is a constraint, like you had just mentioned earlier. So I shot a grocery store once where, I had, I don't know, maybe like an hour and a half or something. I can't remember, but before they'd opened, right? They're just getting the store ready.
Yeah.
So, and I'm shooting it for like site inspection purposes. So it's not for marketing or anything. It's just there so they can see their signage and look at all the product on the shelves or whatever. So I get through most of the property and I realize I'm going to run out of time. So just really quickly create a new floor and then just go backfill. I just scan everything I could possibly get my hands on real quick. And then later I just drag and drop all of the scans where they're supposed to go in terms of data alignment, which is a thing with iGuide. And then in terms of what I need and what I don't need, rather than like think it through, like planning meticulously each scan, like, now forget it, just fly through it, scan as many as I can, and then kind of sort it out later. And it's really flexible in Stitch. You can kind of do that, combine different things and put them together, and then choose to eliminate some and keep some other ones, or whatever you want to do.
Was that because of the time it took to align as you're scanning? You just wanted to eliminate that? And
exactly, I was being very thorough in terms of like where I was positioning my scans. I don't know if other systems work exactly like this, but with iGuide it's usually beneficial to work almost like a perimeter first. This is what I find anyway. You can do whatever you want, but I like to go around the outside of a structure so that I've got a nice big like box or whatever, and then I'll go backfill stuff. So often with things like grocery stores, like it's like a big open space. So like It might as well capture the structure first and then go back and infill all the like, racks or whatever you call the displays and stuff. Warehouse is the same thing. I usually do a perimeter, then I'll go kind of zigzag through the middle. At that point, I'm not, measuring the space so much as just filling in the interior scans or visuals. If someone wants to see from the middle of the warehouse for some reason, they can do that. And so I'll think about it in sort of like two parts. Like, okay, I'm measuring, and then I'm going back and I'm filling in the rest, just for visual reference or for measurement, depending on what it is.
Yeah, I've done a warehouse. Actually, we could talk about it. The first scan I did with iGuide was this huge warehouse, like 53,000 square feet.
Is it the one you're in right now?
No, it's the sister one.
Okay.
This is just a better image for the background, but
that's fake. No.
Yeah. So I don't have a preference on scanning the perimeter and filling in or zigzagging. It just kind of depends on the space I'm in. I don't think I do have a preference.
Every space is different. Every technology is different as well. So some are going to dictate that you do something rather than something else. But I definitely like to section things out so that like I'm working on one area and then that's it. There's nothing worse than realizing that you've missed something after the fact, and then feeling that regret, like, oh, I really wish I'd gotten that. One of the things about iGuide, which I'm sure you probably appreciate and also don't like, is that it's very forgiving with regards to like, having extra scans. They're sort of optional in a lot of cases. So, if you walk into a room and you do one scan, that's like enough. The process of getting the iGuide published, it'll work. But then sometimes later you think, it would have been cool if I had one over there and one over there and one over there. So rather than do that, I tend to overshoot. And so I usually follow like a pattern, and then it makes my life a little easier.
Yeah. For residential, I tell my photographers to do minimum of 2 or 3 scans in a room.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the same could apply to non-residential. But that's just in case image file gets corrupt, which I've never had happen. But if something happens, maybe the view is bad or whatever, we can always hide that one and then use alternatives.
Things have sort of changed over the last few years, and the way people use tours is becoming more sort of like refined, like 3D virtual environments, if we're going to call it that, outside of sort of residential real estate, have become a little bit more like sophisticated, which is a good thing, and more commonplace, I would say. So a big part of that, what we found anyway, as a big part of that is measurement, like online measurement, on-screen measurement. So that means measuring obviously from the tour after the fact. And with iGuide specifically, there are more options for measurement if you have more scans. So the more scans you have, the more you can use the triangulation to pinpoint measurement. So what we find is that I personally would do this, but we also encourage people to overshoot, because it's just like, you don't necessarily need it, but you're creating a much more comprehensive set of data if you capture more scans, and it's like little things, but it pays off later, right? Like you're really creating something of value for your client that has more value if you have more scans, which is kind of cool, because that means the effort that you put in, the more effort, the more valuable the thing that you're making, whether they appreciate it or not. It's debatable, but like, just give me an example of with an iGuide, if you scan a bunch of scans near like a window, you will get more precise measurement of that window opening, just because you'll have more options to measure from, and you'll have different proximities and stuff. So it usually means we shoot a lot more than was necessary.
Well, I was hired by a company to scan a baseball stadium, and they hired me for one particular use case. But as I was scanning it, I thought of at least 3 other use cases that this scan would be applicable to. So example,
I was just going to have an example of how I would like to use a baseball stadium tour for pathfinding. I get like huge anxiety when I like take my kids to like sporting events or like concerts or, Marvel on Ice or whatever. And I always get, I'm like, everybody hold on, and it's like, and I drag them through the space and I try not to get lost. So just for figuring out where things are, that would be awesome.
Well, so example, I met the contact at the site, and they told me where I could start at. So it was the upper leftmost corner of the park in the nosebleed seats, you know, as high
Yep.
as I could get. And she goes, okay, well, call me if you need anything. And to me, that's like a challenge. Like, I don't need a map to find directions,
Yep.
that kind of thing, right? So I'm like, I'm not going to call you. I'm good. But it, you know, 4 or 5 hours later, it got to be lunchtime, and I'm like, oh, I'd like some food. So I'm able to navigate myself down the stairs to the concourse level. And then I was like, wait a minute, there's not a game plane. So there's not all the food that's normally in the
Oh
ballpark,
yeah.
you know, completely empty. So I'm like, okay, alternative is to go outside of the stadium and find some food or DoorDash. I decided to DoorDash, but I needed to figure out how to get back to my car, which is parked inside the stadium. But you know, there's a maze. So to your point, as far as navigation inside a stadium, that was one of the use cases, was how do I, as a vendor of the ballpark, how do I get from where I'm at to the bathroom, or where I'm at to the lunchroom where I can eat lunch, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I'm kind of obsessed with the wayfinding, pathfinding aspect of it because that's a personal challenge for me. But there's so many applications. So, for example, if you need to send like a contractor to a very specific, oh, I don't know, boiler room or something to fix a piece of HVAC equipment, you can technically, you know, depending on what tourist system you're using, well, with iGuide, you can do this. You can just turn on the scans that just go to that spot and create a view for them, and then they can just see exactly what they need to get to the area that they're going within the context of a floor plan. Like, it couldn't be any easier. They can see it in a map, and then also they can navigate visually the entire way. People often too have a lot of anxiety regarding certain types of facilities. This is a funny one that a lot of people don't appreciate, but things like dentist's offices, chiropractic offices, places with small rooms that are kind of anxiety inducing. People like to just get in there and like look around at how they get to spaces ahead of time. I don't know why. Maybe just eases anxiety or something. I'm not sure, but
So regarding, I was going to ask you, you were mentioning that you can, you know, turn on the scans and provide that view to a certain vendor. Is that just, that would be duplicating the view and then hiding everything but the ones you want to show?
that's
Is
right.
that,
Yeah. Well, I guess there's two ways to do it. One would be to capture the space in a way that only has that, but that's a bit specific. I don't think people would
yeah,
usually do
no,
that, but you could if you wanted to. There are you can export, for example, an iGuide to Google Street View, and that's how people use that. They'll just scan what they want, and that's it, and then they
yeah,
upload it. So in theory, if you had a very specific route that you really wanted to show everybody, you could just shoot an iGuide of nothing but that. That'd be fine. But yeah, most of the time, you know, like we have a, I think it's a university campus building. It's huge. It's a giant building that we use as a demo. And because it's a really large facility that includes, you know, gymnasiums and I don't know, boiler rooms and cafeterias and everything. And that is a great example of just so many different uses. You know, you might have a campus tour where you're showing people 5 or 6 things. You might have something that's about utilities. You might have visiting people who just need just to know where the, you know, the change rooms and the gymnasium are. I don't know. So yeah, the pathfinding aspect is really cool, and I like it.
yeah. No, that's huge. And I didn't think about doing that with an iGuide, but that's something that, you know, I guess you could do. And it's simple. You can do that. I can do that on my own with a tour, right? I can just duplicate a view.
Anytime you want. Yeah.
I,
You can just turn off the scans you don't like and keep the ones on that are relevant. So for a client, if you can teach them how to use the tour as a tool, you can say, look, you can create as many versions of your iGuide as you like. And if you want to create one that only shows this very specific thing, go for it. And that I think Matterport has that, but with the iGuide, it's always been there, and it's just been this weirdly useful thing for ages. So when I sold my house, you know, during COVID, um, it was very awkward because people couldn't go in my house for longer than maybe 15 minutes because
yeah,
you couldn't go on at once, right? I had to go one at a time.
yeah.
So it was a very hot market at the time, and so people would go in, they'd look at this house 15 minutes and they'd leave. And so I made 2 versions of the iGuide. I made one where it was like the nice, pretty marketing stuff. And then I made one where it was like everything, all the ugly things in the haunted basement and all that stuff. And like, you know, it was useful. So if an agent had someone who could only spend 15 minutes in the house, it's like, well, look, send your contractor like the whole thing, like the closets and everything. And they can get a real good sense of all of the house, you know, even though you only spent 15 minutes in there, you still have all this data. And that worked out really, really well.
Yeah.
Um,
So the first, yeah, I'm getting all these ideas to talk about as you're talking, but
That's good. That's
with
excellent.
yeah, with regards to COVID, I bought an iGuide, and it sat on my shelf for a while. Uh, and it was only because I think that not a lot of people in my area had heard of iGuide. And so, everybody's kind of like school of fish. They see one product, everybody goes that way. And
Yeah.
so it sat on my shelf, and the first scan I did was this warehouse on an old Navy base in Vallejo, where I'm from. They shut down in '95, I think, and they have 7 million square feet of leasable space out there. And I started doing the photos and aerials for marketing purposes. And I was like, well, there's these leasing associates who are taking all these potential tenants to, like, 15 different buildings, and they're putting miles on their feet each day because they're huge spaces.
Yeah.
And I said, why not just scan a space, send somebody a link? Usually these tenants are overseas, or in other areas where they can't easily get to Mare Island. And then, by the time they get there and want to see it in person, they're that much more willing to lease the space.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Don't
They
have to show them, like,
pre-qualify themselves essentially. Yeah.
yeah, they can eliminate the three that won't work for them, based on the tour, and then they'll pick the one they want. So I have a ton of feature requests I'm probably gonna throw out there as I've been doing this. I'm like, this would be better. This would be better. I won't bother you with those today because I don't want to put you on the
Thank
spot,
goodness.
and I don't think that it'll get fed up the chain.
Yeah, I'm not important enough that so it doesn't matter.
No. Very
Oh,
important. So what are some of the use cases you mentioned? You did a grocery store for like a site survey.
yep.
They just wanted to kind of get a general idea of what the store looked like. Maybe it was an owner.
Bigger retail, buildings are rife with decision-making possibilities with regards to where things are in physical space. So store shelves, there's product, there's pricing information, there's the way all the racks are positioned with the end caps and the shelves or whatever. I'm not an expert, but all of that stuff has to be planned out. Yeah. And it has to then be like executed on that plan. So things to be put in place. Then there's product facing, all that stuff. So getting a quick scan to sort of review a facility of that, that for those things makes sense. But then there's also specifically using the grocery store as an example, there's like signage that they hang everywhere. It's funny, you don't really think about it, but then once you go and you look, there's tons of it. Yeah. So they have like big banners and signs and all sorts of stuff. So that's something that they change a lot, right? So they go in and they look, and then they're like, okay, we need to move this or order more or whatever. And then there's also the sort of just basic facility aspect of it. You've got fridges and freezers and meat cutters and I don't know, whatever else stuff. And that stuff can be, moved, replaced, repurposed, or upgrades can be planned or whatever. And then there's sort of, sort of like the people aspect of it, optimizing spaces so that they like work. It's kind of space planning, makes more sense for offices, but grocery stores have to do this too, right? Like, are aisles wide enough? Are the cash registers, properly spaced or whatever? Where are the carts located? Like all that kind of stuff. And then, you get to the end, and then there's like marketing stuff. Like people want to see inside stores. That gets a little problematic because obviously the product differs from when you shot it to maybe when they arrive. So that's not necessarily ideal for every location, but still technically possible. And then, just seeing a space before you go. So with regards to businesses, like something like a grocery store, sometimes they're like legitimately beautiful. I know that's a weird thing to say about grocery stores, but I live in the middle of nowhere. So when we go to the big city, we're just like, wow, like, the huge displays. It's so magical. So it's very cool to think that you can show people a space before they get there to entice them to go. Like, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, check out our cool store location or whatever. so that you can say, wow, like you would never know sometimes, right? Grocery stores, especially, they're just big metal boxes. So it's kind of interesting to think that all that effort and attention might be for nothing if people never physically go to the space. So this is a cool like in between where they can like see something virtually, and that could make them think, oh wow, I should go there, and then they might get them in the door, you know.
Well, and to that point, I have a lot of vegans in my family, and I'm not one of them. I don't partake. But you know, that's now anyway. There's a lot of stores that have vegan options, but not every store does. So that would be something maybe
Oh,
from
that's
a
true. Yeah.
store standpoint, is to point out, you know, visually you can say, okay, here's all the organic fruits and vegetables. Here's the vegan cheese. Here's the meatless, you know, burritos.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's a good point. It's pretty sporadic. In sort of my region, some stores are much better than others. So yeah, I could see that
yeah,
being totally something you'd want to check out ahead of time for sure.
yeah. So kind of bouncing back to the ballpark, talking about, you know, vendor paths to get from, you know, the parking area to the boiler room. As I was navigating the ballpark with this representative from the stadium, they hadn't been there that long and they weren't familiar with, you know, all the areas and all the names of the spaces that I was supposed to scan.
Yeah.
So, and they had a kind of a high level overview of the map where it had just a few spaces named, but they didn't know where everything was. And then I thought of, okay, here's another use case for scanning this ballpark is training purposes. You can
Oh,
give
absolutely.
a
Yep.
scan to your staff and say, okay, familiarize yourself with the park. Here's where the bathrooms are. Here's where the lunchroom is. I keep going back to lunch for some reason, but yeah, there's all these different use cases for training purposes for that.
Yeah, I could see that being extremely useful, especially if it's a ballpark. This is a huge space, right? So it's, you know, far more interactive than just like a map, like a top-down 2D map.
Yeah.
So that could be useful for, yeah, planning and training. You know, where to put people, especially during a large event. Yeah, event planning, that makes a lot of sense.
Another thing was an as-built BIM model. We can have as-built measurements because this park was finished in 2000, and even while I was on site scanning, they had electricians in there doing work and they had all this stuff going on. And so I'm sure a ton has changed from when the blueprints were made until now. So we could go in and scan it. And now you'll have to clarify this for me because I haven't done anything with data files from iGuide. Can you take the DXF file, and I'm a little ignorant to this because I don't know about BIM too much and I don't know about the
Yep.
data file, but can you take a DXF file and get kind of enough data out of it to provide as built BIM file? Is that possible?
Yes and no. So this is super complicated. So I can't speak to every aspect of the way people use data in the BIM context. I'm just learning about that myself, to be honest. But the way that the iGuide data works is that we provide obvious deliverables like the online experience. You know, that's the 3D virtual environment with the measurement tools and PDF floor plans. But in addition to that, we provide a DXF file, which contains all of the drawn spaces and the point cloud. So that's useful for people who want to have the actual data itself, like what you captured on site, like the laser lidar point cloud, and then also have the interpretation of that space, which is just a fancy way of saying how a draftsperson interpreted the walls. In the future, we'll have very soon the an upgraded version of the DXF. This is a sneak peek. Nobody knows this yet. We haven't launched it, but I'll tell you anyway. It's cool. We're going to have a DWG file that will have enhanced features. It's got like better data. There's the walls are like drawn differently, and it's going to have standardized door sizes, and it'll have better layering and all sorts of stuff. I've heard of AIA standard layering. It's going to have. So that's part of what, you know, BIM is. It's not the whole picture. There's more to it than that. Again, I'm not an expert, but it is definitely an essential part. Every facility documentation process starts with measurement and somehow gets to a floor plan. So, so that's obviously iGuide can be a big part of that.
So we got training purposes, we got data files, we got floor plans, and I guess asset and facilities management kind of ties in with maybe vendor routes in a way, because with asset management, we can scan a warehouse that has machines and boilers, air conditioning units, and all that. And I know iGuide released the tag editor. Was it last year? Maybe it's been a while. I haven't played with it too much, but maybe you can enlighten me on the tag editor. Are you able to add in image files, video files, or links as tags on the tours so we can have a picture of a serial number or of a water heater or something of that nature?
So glad that you asked me this, because another sneak peek. I mean, you probably saw the webinar that I did, so it's not really a sneak peek, but the tagging is about to get an upgrade to what we're calling real-time tagging. And yes, to answer your question, yes, you can add supplementary information to any tour and to any point in 3D space within that tour. So that's like ridiculously powerful just on its own, because you can add images, text, video. We're going to eventually have an asset library where you can add like PDFs and other things, but that comes with all sorts of weird caveats because there's like a lot of data involved. But for the most part, you can already do this with tagging. You can add all these things, and they're amazing because what they do is they take that 3D virtual environment and they add this enormous amount of depth, and they create if you add the tags yourself, you create a really comprehensive set of data. So it's more than just like you scanned a space. Now all of a sudden you've got, maybe a picture of a data plate behind a door, or maybe a picture of the manual, or maybe a text description, or maybe you've got a moisture meter reading in an area because there's a flood damaged sort of area or something like that. But what's coming in the next couple of weeks is something called real-time tagging, which means you can just do it when you're there. So the example I used previously, which still really holds up, is if you're doing a museum. So if you're shooting a museum, each unique piece is going to usually have this like little, plate with like all the little text on it. So you can do a close-up photo of that and add it right into the tour. So people can be immersively in the tour, in the context of being there and feel like they're present in the space, but then they can get access to that information, presented to them in tag format, which just means a little like rectangular window. But that's huge, because that in a real-time sense means that when you're scanning the space, you have a very simple workflow. You scan the space and then you take a photo and you add it to the tag and you put it on the scan that you just did. So you tell it where it is, and then you move on to the next one and you do it again, and you move on to the next one and you do it again. And that just, like, to me anyway, makes a lot of sense. Capturing all the images of all the data plates and then adding them after the fact sounds horrible because you'd have to keep track of all the images.
So I scanned outside on this old Navy base, and they had a lot of different monuments with plaques, like maybe one was service members lost during war, which the camera system was great, but you couldn't zoom in enough to get detail to read the plaque. And so what I found myself doing was taking my cell phone and getting really close and taking a picture. But when I got home, I had 70 pictures, and I'm like, okay, well, where was that particular plaque at? So the next time I was out there, I took one far away, and then I zoomed in, and then far away, and then I zoomed in, so that I could have direction. Okay, this plaque goes here on the tour, and it was kind of a pain to be able to do that. So in real time, being able to do it is huge. I thought of another point in particular with regards to warehouses and, well, anything commercial, where they are using smart meters to measure gas, electricity, water, and that sort of thing. Do you think, or do you see it being a possibility that at some point we're able to add, if I take a picture of an electric meter, to be able to have the tag editor at some point where it will show current readings using embedded data codes?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked. We already have that. So in any tag, you can add embed embeddable code or a website. So that means that I can't think of an example off the top of my head of a company that does it. Vitality.io does it. They're one group. But basically, you can take that IoT data and you can embed it right in the tag so that if you hover over, yeah, it was a good example, an electrical meter or some other thing that provides live data. Yep, you can see it in real time right in the iGuide. Yeah, it's cool.
Nice. So that would be huge for facilities managers. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of weird data. Like again, I'm not like an expert on this because my expertise is in residential real estate and a few other areas, but there's occupancy metering, which is kind of cool. There's obviously HVAC, so you've got temperature and whatever humidity, I guess. Electrical consumption, I would imagine, is a thing. Yeah. But a lot of this stuff is very graphical, like it's cool line graphs and charts and numbers. And yeah, and they update in real time. It's very neat.
I come from a world that deals with that sort of stuff. And prior to doing this, that was my world with dealing with software that took all the data from these devices and translated it to a graphical representation on a website. So, I'm thinking about a meter that is in the middle of a factory in Istanbul. And, you have some manager who's in New York who manages all these sites, and he sees a spike somewhere. He's able to get on a website and go to that factory in Istanbul via a link and look at the meter and say, okay, on the far left of the building, there's a meter that's having an issue. Let's get somebody out there to try to fix it. Versus flying over there and getting someone to walk you around the factory and try to find that one meter. They could easily...
Yeah. The alternative almost seems impossible. Like you're going to call someone at a facility and you're going to tell them what you need, and then they're going to go find it, and then they're going to come back and tell, like, that's ridiculous, right? I think the big advantage, so facility management seems a bit slow on the uptake for some of this stuff. Like I know they're obviously getting there because there's huge cost and time savings, but I think that the advantage that we're seeing anyway in terms of facility management is not necessarily the IoT side. Like getting virtual dashboards, that's a thing that's been around for a while. It's putting them in context, like having it be in the very room that you're looking at. And so you can use that. It's not muscle memory. I don't know what the term is, but like you've got 5 things in a row and you just kind of know it's the second one from the left. Like it's just very helpful and very human way of interacting with data to have it located spatially. So that seems to be very appealing for people, which makes sense. And again, yeah, huge cost time savings. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I think another use case would be, a factory or a warehouse that has a bunch of windows that need to be replaced. You can, on the tour, count the number of windows, measure them, and get a rough estimate of how big those windows are, and then send them out to a contractor to get a bid. Here's the approximate size of the windows, here's the number of them.
That absolutely makes perfect sense. There's anything you can think of. So if you're managing if you're a facility manager and you're managing a portfolio of properties, you're really trying to maintain their value, I think was my understanding. So there's a lot of things. Yeah, windows, flooring, any type of surface, tile, paint, whatever. Anything you can measure in 3D space. Yeah, you can use it to get quotes, and then you can get that bidding started virtually. It's a huge time savings in that regard. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there any use cases that we haven't talked about that you think are ideal in regards to non-residential scanning?
Like bigger spaces. So we think we covered the big ones. So you've got big spaces, that people want to explore. You've got big spaces that people want to kind of, not publicly explore, but monitor. So they're going to do like virtual site visits, so that's saving them the drive time to go. You've got spaces that people want to measure. I think we hit on just about everything. I can't think of any examples.
What was that use case, if you don't mind sharing?
Of which, sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned
the hospital. Yeah. If anyone ever asks you to shoot a hospital, just say no. They're like, imagine the maximum number of tiny rooms you can fit into a space. That's what they're like. And it didn't even occur to me, right? So the funny thing about the hospital is that we got to shoot it when it wasn't open yet. So this is ideal. You can't get any better than this. There are no people in the whole facility. We did 5 or 6 floors, like all the way from ground level up to the mechanical room. And it was brand new, clean as a whistle, sort of furnished, not fully. Hospitals have really weird furniture, so I don't know if that would have made it harder or what. But very compact rooms and just tons of them. We shot it over multiple days, and it was probably the most complex shoot I've ever done. Um, because of the way that the property is just laid out, right? There's just tons of tiny little weird rooms. And then it had, actually, it's really funny. It had big expansive basements that like went on for ages. They were just empty, just nothing, and no details whatsoever, just big open cinder block rooms. It had really creepy what do you call, operating theater things that were like these weird hallways, and it was dead silent and there was no one there. That was kind of fun. But that took 2 or 3 days, multiple cameras. There were 2 cameras. It was a fella, Josh, and I. And I had a really funny experience. So the battery on, so I used IMS5, the older version of the camera to do it. So the new camera would have been even better, but we shot continuously for like 8 hours, and I was like exhausted. Like I couldn't even walk at this point. Like my legs hurt. Like I'm old, so I'm complaining, but like, I'm tired. And I looked down and I still have an hour and a half of battery left. And I was like, oh, like who's upset that they have battery left? Like I was like, oh, I guess we'll keep going. But that's just like one of those weird things. Like we talk about the iGuide camera system being like an all-day battery. Oh, it is. Like it'll quit way after you do. So that was a funny insight there.
So what was the use case for it?
Yeah, so what they wanted to do was create a snapshot before they started using it, so they could use it to monitor, like, I guess deterioration is the term, maybe. They just wanted like a snapshot of it in pristine condition so they could use that as like a benchmark for what it should be like. And then they wanted to use it for space planning, and then they had this idea to use it for, I don't know if they ever did this, but to use it for orientation. That because basically there's a whole giant new facility, and they have to move all these teams into like every floor, and like hospitals are crazy complicated. So it was like, they have the whole like maternity area, and then the whole what do you call it, the emergency room stuff, and then so everyone has to go in for these orientations, and they don't have very long in there. Have these group, and we were there while they were doing some of the in-person ones, and they'll have like 30 nurses go in, and they go through an area and then they leave, and everything looks the same because it's like every floor looks identical. I can imagine that the first few weeks would be very challenging because people just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So I think that they thought, and I hope this worked out for them, I should check, that the iGuide would have been very helpful during that process to make things significantly more efficient. I had a real incentive to scan this space for sort of like a more public reason. So my wife and I have 4 children, and every time we go to a hospital to have a child, I'm just so confused. so like I was like, this will be awesome. They'll have an iGuide, and like people who show up will be able to figure out where it is they're going, even if they're like really stressed out. Yeah. They're about to have a baby. So that I thought that was kind of cool,
I have 4, and I get stressed out. I think everyone gets stressed out every baby. It never gets easier. We talked a lot about the scan. I assume you connected the space with stairwells. The floors you connected with stairwells. Was there any challenges?
Stairwells are funny, especially in bigger spaces. They get pretty awkward. So it's not an issue as long as you capture enough scans with iGuide. Stairwells they take care of themselves. You don't have to worry. The only time where it was challenging in that context, like the hospital, was where you'd have extra structure just for the stairwells themselves. So they don't fit like nicely in a floor plan like with a house, where it's just like a stairwell that goes up. It's in the living room. They'd be weird. Like they'd jut out of the building and go up and like do stuff. So that means, unfortunately, sometimes you have to do extra scans in and around the stairwells. That particular example, the hospital that we did, had the new building that we were scanning, and then it had an old building. So it had actually a multi-level glassed catwalk that went from one building to the other. That was super weird, but like, it's just space. It's just physical space. You just have to scan it like you would any other space. So stairwell, same thing. It's just extra, area that you need to capture, just so for coverage's sake, you just do extra scans. But other than that, it just takes care of itself mostly.
If you had a space that, because I was thinking about the ballpark, there was an area where you could only get to another level via an elevator. So I'm wondering, what would you do? Scan at the elevator on one floor, and then the next floor you make would be the upper floor, and you'd scan right off of the elevator on that floor?
So every property is different, but we did a Google office once where they had all these weird mezzanines, which is like they're like their own floors, which is super bizarre. So what we did is so that they're kind of like all on the second floor, if that makes any sense, but you can only get to them from certain spaces, which is kind of what you sort of said there. So what we would do is we included them where it made sense, and we had them be their own floors where that makes sense. And you can do that. It's fine.
Yeah.
So where it was sort of like fully disconnected, we just made it its own floor. And then, when you'd view it, it would just be its own like rectangle or whatever shape it was. But where it was within, say there was like multiple mezzanines, it was a very strange building, the Google office. So it had like a whole second floor, and then there'd be like a weird gap, and then there'd be like a mezzanine, and then a hallway, and then another mezzanine up somewhere else. So yeah, we just kind of played it by ear, and it was kind of however you wanted to arrange it. And the way that was done was just by using again in post-processing, just using Stitch to just like, okay, you decide, all right, this is going to be its own floor, and you have control. So you just create a new floor and then drag all the scans over and make it its own thing. And then the in processing, they see that and they just make it for you if you want.
Nice, nice. Well, I think you probably answered every question I had, and you made me think of some feature requests that I'm going to have to log. So I'll be telling whoever to thank you for that. But yeah, thank you for your time. I really, truly appreciate it. And do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we're good. I think we covered a lot.
We did, yeah. Minus these microphone issues that I'm going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I hope your audio is good. I don't know. It's sort of in and out a couple times, and I'm like, yeah.
So even if it's you or me.
Yeah. I'll take the blame if it's me. It's okay.
Thank you again, Chris White from Planitar. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right.
Let's do it again. All right, later, skater. Have a great rest of your day.